Hi, everyone. And again, thank you for being here tonight to celebrate Elizabeth's new book. She is the award-winning host of Poetic Lines, which features in-depth interviews with established and emerging poets. For 10 years, she did edits of poetry for the Christian Science Monitor, and from 2015 to 2019, she wrote a monthly poetry column for the Washington Post. She's had numerous publications in the US, UK, and Canada. Unsilenced is her first poetry book. And I have to tell you, it was such an honor to publish this book. When I saw the manuscript, I just had to publish it. Domestic violence is a huge problem, and it appears that it's not going anywhere, unfortunately. I worked as a social worker and clinical director for 40 years, and I have seen some of it, especially in my early days of my career. I had two people in my office, and the guy was very violent and was always threatening her with a gun. And when they were in my session, I knew he had one. And that was before they screened, there was no screening of weapons when somebody came into the building. So it was pretty scary. And then I've seen some of it with my clients, out here. So it's very, very difficult. And I think, you turn on TV, you see it constantly, things happening. Um, and also, I think everyone here probably even knows somebody that has suffered domestic violence. So Elizabeth's book is very, very important. Um, so now I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Gloria. And thank you, everybody, for coming. As I look out on the different squares, I see people that I've known from different parts of my life. Marjorie, dear Marjorie, who was in the MFA program at Cornell with me, and we have stayed in touch since then. And then I see BG, who helped shape these poems and helped me get across the final finish line when I thought I couldn't finesse some of the poems. She said, yes, keep going, you're almost there. And then I see Svinia and Michael Escalator, who wrote wonderful blurbs for the book and who really understood what I was trying to say in these poems and what I was trying to accomplish with the work. And I see David, a dear friend of many, many years, and Gray. I don't know if you can see in the background, but Gray sent me this wonderful bouquet and fantastic box that says congratulations. So thank you, dear Gray. Gray is a wonderful poet and my collaborator in the Haiku Newton project. I appreciate all of you so much because in whatever capacity I've known you, you have been a huge support. Your friendship and your writing and just your presence in the world means so much to me. So thank you very much for being here on a snowy evening. I know several people had planned to come but weren't able to because of either the weather or some last minute changes. But I am thrilled to be sharing these poems with you here. So Gloria mentioned that domestic violence is a huge problem, but it's a subject that I never thought I would write about. And I had really no awareness of how deeply it can impact someone until my beloved Aunt Elaine was shot and killed several years ago by her husband of 40 plus years. And after her murder, family members were left with so many questions. What had happened? Why did he do it? And I think the most haunting question of all was there anything I could have done to change that outcome? So after a few weeks, I ended up writing one poem, and that made me feel better. And then over the course of several weeks, the poems just started coming one by one. And then over several months, I started shaping the collection. And with the help of some dear friends, some of whom can't be here tonight, but whose imprint is certainly all over this book, the poems began to coalesce to tell a story. And the book is broken down into 3 sections. I want to start with the opening poem, which sets the tone for the work. It's called Remembering Elaine. One great blue heron punctuates the shore, huddling in first snow. What keeps this steel-eyed juvenile here, weeks after the others have flown? Gray on gray, she stands like a wrought iron question mark. What does she read in the tinfoil sky, its indecipherable script? Does she stand like me, awaiting a sign? Has she hunkered too far down? How do winged creatures lose their lift, their bold exclamation point? One could say the sky turns a deaf ear, that some stories are meant to trail off. She stands ramrod straight, like a stubborn suicide or a righteous sacrifice. But I'm not ready to let her go as the season's first storm spits and swirls. My Aunt Elaine had this amazing ability to attract stray cats that needed a home. They always seemed to find her, or maybe she found them. But she had an amazing way with any animal that needed nurturing and compassion. The fittest. Animals respond to a gentle voice, she'd say as one shook on her lap. Figaro, Daisy, Magic. She coaxed and captured them all. Princess, Blackie, Snowball, saved from the side of the road. One tiger followed her everywhere, a shadow leaving the room. Another hid under the sofa until she was all alone. Leave them until they can rule, love them until they can rule the savannah, always a gentle voice. Elaine, lost queen of the jungle, you should have roared or run. When I was growing up, everyone in my family knew that Uncle David had a temper, that he was sort of a hothead. And that was just something that we accepted, but didn't really realize until later just how much of an impact it had had on my aunt, going way back to the start of their marriage. This is called steam. Began with one tiny bubble breaking the fragile calm. Another bead, another deep breath, till pockmarks danced in the pan. Help me feed our child, she said. 3rd-degree burn on her wrist. Steam swirled like a funnel cloud. Lion's head shook and roared. Help me change the bandage, she pleaded, as bottles boiled on the stove. Another wound, another short breath, skin bloody as a gazelle's neck. Why won't you help me? Her blisters wept. The answer stung for years. One of the questions that people often are left with after domestic violence has touched a family or irreparably harmed a family is the question of why do women stay? And I think the answer to that is very complicated and has many, many layers. But oftentimes it can be as simple as every now and then she sees a glimmer of an amazing man that she hopes can stay all the time. This poem is called That Sunday. 5 of us bounced in the car while he lowered himself down. To the lake, he said, tossing a kiss while honking the horn. She looked like a sunflower, face turned toward the warmth. Periwinkle sky swallowed us all as we rolled out the yard. For years, she held that moment, her perfect husband once. Throughout these poems, there are owls that appear, and the owls say or know things that the humans don't. And so this next poem is one instance of the owl knowing something that my aunt did not. Warning. Silence is like a horror movie, Owl said from the top of the stairs. Don't stand by the front door alone. Don't let him take aim. Sometimes we must flee without maps, just one terrifying leap. Sweeten up, she scolded him. Heard the slide snap back. After a loss, there are always questions and ideas or self-accusations that keep coming back. And this poem captures one of those. Refrain. The family removed, let me try that again. Refrain. The family removed all of his guns, thought they'd removed all his guns. All the weapons removed, they thought. All weapons the family removed. All but one, the newspaper said. All but one. These poems also attempt to give my aunt back some of her voice. And this poem, as brief as it is the first instance where that happens. Unanswered. 3 days after he died in prison, her voice began to call. Tell others not to make my mistake, waiting silently for the slaughter. When Gloria is talking about her work and how that introduced her to the problem of domestic violence, that brought back memories for me because I volunteered for 10 years at the women's prison here in Massachusetts. And many of the women I met there had dealt with abuse in their own lives. So this poem and the next few that follow share the voices that I heard at Framingham. Interrogation. For 3 weeks in March, our barred owl kept watch from a beech tree inside the barbed wire fence. Who comes for you? It asked every night of the women trapped in their prison blues. The question echoed across the empty yard. Who comes for you, or you, or you? Perhaps the bird divined lonely passings or knew how lovers, friends, and children rarely ever visit. Who comes for you or remembers your name? The owl repeated until every brown leaf, still clinging from last season, shriveled and fell from the tree like an unspoken confession. Sonia's ballad. Sang his anger, sang his love. Heart was hot, veins cold. Baby, come here, go away. Always hot, then cold. Icicles wept in February, days he wouldn't come home, hid her anger, sang her love, hate to be alone. Baby, I need more than you. Blizzard without snow. No other man will want you. Fear grew hot, heart cold. Maria's mirage. No one understands why I stay. He just needs a little more love. Red bites, yellow bruises, blue lights slicing the sky. He was never treated right. Mother, father, friends, purple eyelids, scarlet scars. Is that blood on the door? Pay no mind, I tripped and fell. He just needs a little more love. Other women shift in their seats. Sister, why can't you open your eyes? This collection moves from dark toward light. But before the light, there was a lot of searching, at least on my part, because I kept thinking, could this have gone another way? Could I imagine now another outcome? This poem is called At the Animal Park, Route 13. Put your finger in her mouth. That always makes her smile. 8 weeks old, coat thick as a lamb's, she gnaws my thumb, dry, useless nipple. Muscles coil as she pulls my wrist closer, muse for her mothers, aunts, guardians, generations of wingless Lamassu. She doesn't know her power yet. Hold that pulse. Hold it. Years ago, 3 others stood watch over a girl, raped, bloody, beaten. I picture them now circling my aunt, standing between her and my uncle. Females do most of the hunting, you know. What are you looking for? The cub squirms and growls, hind legs practicing grandmother steps, silent, tiny, stealthy. Miles from my pride, I feel my thighs tighten as if I'm hunched by a water hole, waiting. Want another photo? You may never cuddle a lion again. Victim to victor, holder to held. Give me this moment, whatever the cost, where the predator shakes, hunted. One of the things that I struggled with most after my aunt's passing was the fact that I had been in a relationship. I had actually been engaged to someone when I was in graduate school who was emotionally abusive and was heading toward physical abuse. I got out, but I was so embarrassed by the experience that I never really told anyone. I just kind of hushed it, just hushed it up, pushed it aside, and never wanted to revisit that. And I often wondered later, what if I had told my aunt about this? Would it have made a difference? Secret. I should have told her. I escaped. 2 a.m., he was beating my door. I woke to see 2 gauzy figures. There was no moon that night. The banging rose. I'll rip you apart. The safety chain, and I groaned. Help me. I cannot breathe. My words tangled like the sheets. I never told her or anyone. One figure stayed at the foot of the bed, the other by my side, my phone in the other room. I should have told her. I escaped. You can too. Don't continue to hide. One specter stood sentry at the door. The other covered my eyes. In every situation, there is an element of choice. And that's one of the things I wanted to touch on in these poems. Two owls in conversation. Like Minerva, she tried to love them both, arguing in the trees. This is my home, called the first. I own these hills and fields. The second defended stolen turf. Your world belongs to me. Birches, pines slowly bent, seduction filling the dark. She and I will soar all night. No, she will hide with me. The two debated like philosophers still trapped in that old cave. Shadows are my reality. Mine is a cloudless sky. One voice crept, the other soared, each suitor hoot-hooing his say. When did she learn that one must choose? How did she decide? As I was working on these poems, several images kept coming back, several memories, and they would sometimes come back with a different tone or a different feeling. This is called Underwater. The challenge was easy then. Dive off the boat at high tide, swim down, down till you touch the white sand, then translate the messages signaled from above. I remember sitting on the bottom, watching the greenish sun wobble or trade one shape for another until the sky became a watercolor map only my cousin and I could decipher. Each wave made the thin paint shimmer, another wash of light rippling across the canvas. Nothing looked the way it should, and sounds like poorly aimed arrows deflected off the surface. Yet when she leaned over the side of the boat, arms waving like seaweed, I knew what she meant. Stay there. Go this way. I'm the queen. We didn't need words, not when an invisible chain ran from boat to sand. A family secret flowed through our veins, an ancient script tattooed on our fingertips long before we were born. Soon enough, my lungs would burn, and I'd kick toward the surface, reclaiming the world of sound. Salt never stung, as I recall, until I broke through the swells. The sky is mine. I own the sun. Hold your breath, hold it. We understood metaphor then. As I mentioned, this book moves from dark toward the light. And that was important to me because I didn't want to just leave my aunt as a victim. I wanted to restore her voice in some small way because I've always considered myself someone who tries to bring more light into the world. In this poem and a couple others, I have tried to do that for dear Elaine. Her last words. I wasn't afraid as I rose above the room, my house, the tree line. 2 pairs of wings soared with me, a slow velvet shimmer. Going home, they sang. Wasn't I just there? A field of feathers below bloomed gold, brown, white to catch me if I faltered. Above, a trap door tightly sealed. To enter, you must leave it all. Every sound scattered then, like prey evading a raptor. I heard myself clearly say, time to rise above this life, sever all phantom pain.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So powerful. Oh my gosh. So if anyone has any questions or would like to comment to Elizabeth, please do so.
Well, I want to say, Elizabeth, first of all, thank you. And there's tremendous courage in speaking the unspoken. I also worked in the domestic violence field for a long time with not only female victims, male victims as well, of all sorts of domestic violence, from the verbal and emotional to the physical. And I also grew up with an emotionally and verbally abusive father. And, so something you said resonated with, about a lot of what you said resonated with me. But I was thinking of my mother and the fallacy that she lived with, that if only we could try a little harder, if only we could love a little bit more, something would change. And I think what we don't realize when we're dealing with people who use abusive tactics and have that psychological structure that allows for those elements of power and control, the rules of engagement that we're used to in life don't apply. And you reflect that so much in especially talking about your ad, but in talking about your own experiences as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Savina, go ahead.
Hi, Elizabeth, I want to, what is your name, the gentleman that just spoke? I want to sort of reinforce what Peter, was it you? Yes. What Peter said, that thank you for the courage in writing this book, and Gloria for publishing it, because it's unfortunately a timeless subject. There are ways to help people, but still not enough ways, and so many people, as you mentioned, suffer in silence and out of shame and self-doubt, which is, you mentioned beautifully, in that glimmer of goodness that shows up, and we run to it because we want to believe that no, we're just imagining the rest of it. So thank you, Elizabeth, for your powerful poems. I did have a question, which is, after writing it, did you feel a change or shift in yourself in terms of putting any kind of closure to the tragic circumstance? And did you sense that process while you were writing the book, or was it painful and remained painful until you were done? Was there a turning point for you?
Thank you for that question. The poems were written over several years, and the manuscript went through several revisions because I wanted to get it right. And I didn't want to send it out into the world until I felt that it said what it needed to say. It needed to have both the dark and also a turn toward the light. But when I was writing many of the poems, there wasn't any light at that point. I was just trying to figure out how to deal with this incredible loss and the shock of it. I remember seeing the news coverage hours after my aunt was killed, and how bizarre it was to see her house from the vantage point of a helicopter that was high above it, and just a 30-second headline that just kind of reduced my aunt to one word, victim. And it just seemed as if so much of her life was taken from her in so many ways. That was one of the things I struggled with as I wrote. And just trying to figure out, how could someone do this? How could someone that you have known for decades suddenly in a split second destroy the life of this wonderful woman and do incalculable damage to the family? It's just something that was so hard for me to grasp. So as I wrote the poems, I started to feel better, but it wasn't until I had written the final poem and then done the final revisions that I finally felt like, okay, the work is done now. I have given her back some of what was taken from her. And then, interestingly enough, there was a day when I could hear her voice just saying, I'm all right. It's nice here. And after that, I just felt so much better, because I thought, the poems have done their work in me, and now they can go out and do their work and help other people. Yes. When I think of her now, I don't think of just that horrible day. I think of all the wonderful times that I spent at her house. And as I mentioned, she always attracted cats. When I was growing up, I don't think she ever had fewer than 6 cats at a time. Her house was full of life, and she had this most wonderful laugh that would just brighten everyone up around her. So yes, by the time I finished writing the poems, I did feel better. I felt like she was 3 and I was 3. And so I no longer carry the grief and the hurt I felt, because I feel as though in some way I helped her move to where she needs to be.
And change the final say on the outcome. She was no longer a victim, and your creativity was life affirming and reaffirming. So it circled back to a great place. And it's the manuscript and the poems and the way you read them is just so charged and full of life and determination and release. So it's really wonderful hearing you read this work out loud.
Well, thank you for your comments. You beautifully articulated what I was trying to say.
I think you said it beautifully. I was just reiterating.
In Gray, you had a question?
Yeah.
Unmute yourself.
I unmute myself.
Yeah, that would help.
I'm unmuted. Thank you. Elizabeth, it's a powerful, powerful reading, and I'm just deeply moved by the voice that you gave your aunt, but also your own voice and your own struggling with that experience. I think you capture so much of the complexity of domestic violence and do it in a very courageous and powerful and insightful way. I was particularly struck by the owls and the way that they work to give another voice to what can't be spoken, often isn't spoken. And I wonder if you would just share a little bit about how those owls came to you and how you worked with them to help this manuscript be so powerful.
That's a good question. I think I have always been drawn to owls. There's something about them that resonates with me, and I can't quite explain why, but they appeared in one poem. And then as I was working on other poems, I realized that there was something missing, that there needed to be the voice of wisdom in certain parts of the manuscript. And I, as the narrator, just wasn't able to provide that. So I let my imagination wander, and suddenly these owls just started talking to me. They would pop up in the poems. It wasn't really me writing them. It was almost like me letting them pass through me. And so they just started to pop up here and there whenever the poems needed some insight or some perspective that I or the characters in the poems just didn't have. And they did become a thread all the way through, because they say things and see things that the humans cannot. And interestingly enough, after Gloria accepted the manuscript, I grappled with the question of, is it right for me to publish these poems? Is this something that should be shared with the world? And so I was up in the White Mountains, and my husband and I have a cabin up there, and it is our sanctuary. But the weekend that I was sort of struggling with that question of, is it right for me to share these poems, he came running into the house. He said, "You've got to come out and see this. There's an owl in the tree." So I went out and I looked up, and there was a barred owl sitting in the tree. And the owl didn't like the fact that we were shining a flashlight so that we could see the owl. The owl seemed rather annoyed about that and flew off, and then came back to the tree. And that was the only time I have ever seen an owl up there. But to me, that felt like a sign that, yes, let the poems go out into the world, because they have something to share that needs to be heard by other people. And my hope for these poems is that they will provide solace for people. They may provide a little bit of encouragement or courage for people who are dealing with a situation. I shared the manuscript before it was published with a dear friend of mine who is like a second mom. And she read it. She said, "Oh my word, I see so much of my own marriage in those poems." And I thought, okay, that's what I needed to hear, because if you can get the sense that you are not alone and you are not at fault for what is happening, it allows you to make better choices. It allows you to feel free. It allows you to reclaim some of what is taken away when someone who is very important in your life tells you over and over, well, you're not worth anything without me, or you're nothing outside of this relationship, or no one else would love you. So yes, I think that the owls have helped me shape the manuscript. They have let me share the poems in ways that I might not have had the courage to do otherwise. And they are an essential part of this whole process. I hope that answered your question.
You handled them beautifully. I would say also that part of the real power that this manuscript has is that there's no poor me. There's no feeling sorry for yourself. There's no even feeling sorry for your aunt. It's just, it explores the pain, but without a poor me. And the power of those owls, the who is heart grabbing. Oh my goodness. And then I would say finally that I think you're right. I mean, I have too many experiences where birds have been connected with people's passing, for me to think otherwise, and that owl was a sign to you of the importance of getting this manuscript in the world. I'm glad it's in the world. I think it's an important thing to be here, and I thank you for it, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for the wonderful blurb you wrote for the back of the book. You articulated so much of what the poems are trying to do.
Gray, you wanted to say something, and then Barbara, you can go after him.
Well, I wanted to comment on the owls, but Michael has commented on that, and I think I'm glad you brought that up, Michael, and I'm glad that you really highlighted the sound of the owls and the role of the owls as this kind of watching over. I did want to give a little bit of a shout out to the underwater poem that you read, Elizabeth. It was so visceral. I just felt I could be right underwater with you, and the metaphor of being underwater in the context of this book is a very powerful one. But the way that you described that experience and the ripples on the sand below, it just was so visceral that I just wanted to underline that. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the flowers. They're lovely.
Elizabeth, I know that I just want to say I'm so happy for you, and I know how intensive this whole process was, and I watched you struggling with it for, God, 30 years. How long has it been? And long time. But the thing that I love about this book is not only do you portray your aunt so vividly, you didn't really read the poems about your uncle, but that was what really struck me, was how amazingly you painted the picture of his personality, and how that type of person still perceives themselves as a victim to the very end, that they really never do take a responsibility for what they have wrought on families and people. They only, it's their character flaw that they only see what's happening to themselves. And I love the owls in there and all the mystery, and I'm just so happy for you. So that's all I wanted to say. Good job.
Well, thank you, BG, and thank you for your help with finessing these poems. As you know, I worked on them for so long, and I had sent them out to a number of different contests, and the manuscript was a finalist here, it was a semi-finalist there, and every time a rejection would come back, I would tinker with the poems a little bit more, and I just reached a point where I knew I had to do some final tweaking, and I just couldn't seem to get there. But you encouraged me to keep going, and I am so glad that you did convince me to persevere, because I think the book is strong. It's what it needs to be.
Oh,
thank you.
You should be proud of you. So good job.
Anyone else? Yes, David.
Well, Michael articulated the question about the owls better than I could, so thank you, Michael. First of all, just congratulations on the long, courageous journey that this book has been for you. Others have said it as well, so I won't belabor that. There are so many lines that hang in the air for me after you read them. A few have already been asked about, but one I'd like to fall back to is when the line was when we understood what metaphor was. And I'm curious what that line means to you now, and does it mean the same thing to you as when you wrote it?
That's a good question. I think the line does mean something different to me now, because when I was working on the poem, I was thinking of just that specific experience, sitting on the bottom of the ocean, a few feet down near a sandbar, and looking up and seeing things in a way that wasn't accurate, but yet was informative and changed the way I perceive things, broadened my perspective. I think now, in light of the fact that I've lived with that poem for a while and the manuscript has reached its completion, I think a metaphor in a broader way. I now think in terms of all experiences, how is this a metaphor for something? And how can I take this part of my journey with these poems and view them in a more expansive way? How can I remember my aunt even in a more expansive way? So I like that poem a lot. That's one of my favorites. And I do like that line. It was one of the lines where it seems as if the poem is writing you rather than you are writing the line. And I remember being a little bit surprised by that line, but thinking that's so right. And then over time, I have come to realize that it is so right in so many ways. And it surprises me every time I think of it and every time I try to take a more expansive view of something.
Go ahead, Marjorie.
I would just like to echo what everybody else said. Thank you so much for these poems and for the reading tonight. And I was curious about when I heard someone mention about the uncle poems. Like, how did you balance the poems about your aunt, the poems about your uncle, the poems about you? And I imagine your experience is part of both of those as well. I imagine that was a way in to, give you that perspective of what could have been. So when you're kind of putting the manuscript together, I'm not sure, I haven't read the whole book yet, so I don't, how is it divided up? You gave us some of that, but.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first section really focuses on my aunt's last few weeks and her murder. And I have poems there that try to understand what was going on in the house at that time, what was going on with him, what he might have been thinking, and what she may have been feeling. The second section is really a chorus of voices. And so those poems are from the perspective of many different women explaining why they stayed. And the third section of the book is where the niece finds her voice and tries to grapple with a lot of these questions and issues. And one of the questions was, why did he do that? Why did he suddenly become someone who seemed so unlike the uncle that I remembered from much of my childhood? So when I was writing the poems, they presented themselves, I guess a lot depended on what I was thinking of and the question I was grappling with. So the poems in the manuscript do try to look at her experience and look at his experience and then try to tie them together at the end. Gloria, would it be okay if I read one poem from the end that might answer
Yes,
Marjorie's
please.
question? Okay.
Please do.
See if I can find it. Okay. This is called Revisiting Lowell Street. 2 blocks from her yellow house, a cemetery swallows decades of secrets. If any escape, the grass hushes, leaves on the trees beat like crow wings. Don't think you can escape us. We didn't hear their rustling as children, our bicycle pedals and tires whirring past headstones faster and faster, chasing sunshine and freedom. If we had slowed, we might have heard warnings faint as hummingbirds. Don't let fear become your shadow. Anger buries you alive. Beyond the gate, I think I see him wearing a wrinkled police uniform. He waves and tips an 8-point hat like the man he should have been. Didn't you die in prison, I ask? Diagnosis dementia? Never apologized. Owl slowly circles above, scolding. You keep writing her story.
Well, that's the best answer you could have given me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything to say or a question before we close? Well, then can we please give Elizabeth another round of applause?